Welcome to OpenBXRX Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. The 2020 census results revealed that New York City's population hit a record 8.8 million, remaining the largest city in the nation, with the Bronx contributing 6.3% to that growth. Joining us now to discuss how the Bronx fared this census is Marc Perry, Senior Demographer at the Census Bureau. Welcome, Marc. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
Nice to have you. So right into it, how was New York and the Bronx's participation in the census overall, Marc? How are we in regards to population this year?
It was very good. It was very good. So nationally, the response rate for the 2020 census was 67%. New York State was a little bit below that, about 64.2%. And the Bronx was a smidge below that at 62.8%.
Thank you for that. And which neighborhoods led to the population growth here in the Bronx in particular?
It was really widespread across the Bronx and actually all of New York City. Um, there weren't particular areas that weren't contributing. I mean, it was pretty moderate growth throughout much of the borough and, in fact, throughout much of the city.
Got it. I know a huge concern with the census count was the fact that so many people left New York City at the beginning of the year due to COVID-19. Were those who left the state during the pandemic still eligible to be counted by the census?
Yes, absolutely. So the reference date for the 2020 census was April 1 of 2020. And so for all of the follow-up operations that happened throughout the summer and early fall, in terms of getting responses from people who hadn't yet participated in the census, we always emphasized that the reference date was April 1. So you were generally supposed to report where you were living on April 1 of 2020. So for instance, if you were living in New York City then, and then because of COVID, you, for instance, moved elsewhere in the country over the next couple of months, you were supposed to report where you were living on April 1. So we reminded people of that when we were doing those follow-up operations.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that, Marc. So how does the Bronx rank amongst the largest cities in the country, if you can share?
That's a fun question. I mean, New York City is far and away the largest city in the country, and it's so big that even each of the boroughs within New York would be a very large city if it was just on its own. So, for instance, for the Bronx, which has just a shade under 1.5 million people, that would rank it as the seventh largest city in the country in 2020. So it'd be a little bit smaller than Philadelphia, which is number 6, but it would actually be bigger than San Antonio. And that's really kind of amazing because when you think about it, the Bronx isn't even one of the biggest boroughs within New York City.
That is really amazing. Number 7, huh?
Yep.
I hope our viewers are surprised about this. I wasn't aware of that. So that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. So the census assured confidence in the quality of the data, yet some are speculating that the Hispanic population was undercounted. And as we know here in the Bronx, the Hispanic population is huge. I think one of the
Yep.
biggest in the city. Can you share if this is true?
Yeah, it is true. So in 2020, the Hispanic share of the population for the Bronx was about 54.8%, which is up a little bit from what it was in 2010. Um, certainly was a lot of focus on the Hispanic or Latino participation in the 2020 census, and we don't have all of the data yet to sort of say how good or bad the count was, if there was potentially an undercount. But so far at this point, the count really does align with all of the benchmark data and all of our expectations going into it. So for the US overall, the Hispanic or Latino population was about 62 million. And actually, our independently generated estimate of what we thought the Hispanic population would be in 2020 was 61 million. So it was actually roughly about a million higher than where we thought it was. So just based on that, there does not so far look to have been a Hispanic undercount. But when we'll really know the answer to that question is next year when we release our what we call our post-enumeration survey. this is what we do to measure the accuracy of the census. So we go back and we independently survey a sample of the population to see if they were counted as part of the 2020 census. So that's when we get our estimate of undercount by age, race, sex, and Hispanic origin. And that will be early next year.
Got it. Thank you for that. I did read through the census report back and some of the news conferences that happened that one population did decrease this year. It was the Black population. Was that just in New York City, Mark, or was that a nationwide consensus?
The Black or African American population, it increased nationally, but all of the race and ethnic groups, there's always sort of migration and sort of increase and decreases at the city and the neighborhood level across the country. So there was, I believe, for the Bronx, a small decrease in the Black or African American population, but nationally, it grew about the same rate as the country overall.
And another thing I'm getting as well from our producer is that we read that there was a nationwide decrease in the white population as well in the census count. Can you approve that as well?
Yeah, there was this time, and it was the first time in a decennial census when the white non-Hispanic population actually declined, not just as a share of the population because it's been doing that for many decades now, but in sheer numeric terms, it was down slightly from where it was in 2010. And it's there's different things that go into whether a population increases or decreases. Part of it is how your births and deaths measure up. If you have more births within a group than deaths, then you'll increase that way. And if you have immigration, you'll increase that way. And the white non-Hispanic population is older than the country overall, so it doesn't really gain much in terms of births and deaths, and it doesn't gain much via immigration.
Thank you for breaking that down for us, Mark. Can you help us define what apportionment is and how the census impacted apportionment?
Yes, so apportionment is the process by which we divvy up the US Congress amongst the states. So the Constitution tells us that every state in the country gets at least one seat in the House of Representatives. So the House of Representatives has 435 seats. You give every state one seat, and then you're left with 385 seats remaining. And the Constitution says that those seats should be allocated among the states according to their populations, so that bigger states get more seats than smaller states. So when we do that, we essentially use a statistical formula to divvy up those 385 seats across all the states. New York is a very large state, so it got 26 seats overall in this census. So the smallest states might only get one or two seats.
Right. Got it. Thank you. And we did share a graphic on screen to help our viewers kind of understand that as you went through it. So thank you for that.
Great.
As we understand, lawmakers are also redrawing maps for districts based on census data through a process called redistricting. Can you explain redistricting and how exactly that works?
Yeah, so redistricting is the next step after apportionment. Apportionment tells you how many seats, for instance, New York State is going to have in the next Congress. So it has 26 seats. Redistricting says, okay, take that total population for New York State and then carve it up into districts that are all of the same size across the state. And so we take all of the very, very detailed data that came out in this redistricting release, which goes down to the block level. So that's even smaller than neighborhoods or census tracts. You think of a city block. So we put out data with the redistricting release for every block in the state of New York. And then redistricting, which is a state function, the legislators in New York State will take this data and then carve the state up into 26 congressional districts, each with roughly the same population as each other.
Got it. Thank you for that. Can we emphasize, Mark, the importance of the census count? Now that we have completed the count, we have the results in. Can you just share how that money, boroughs like the Bronx can receive that money and that support through being counted in this way?
Yeah, I mean, the census results, first and foremost, the Constitution says you do it for apportionment and redistricting, but we know that the census results are used in numerous other ways.
Right.
They're the basis for funding formulas that determine how much money, state and local governments might receive. They're used by businesses to help understand consumers and to understand, okay, this area is growing, so maybe we'll put a new store in this area, or this area has a particular population. Maybe it has a lot of young children, so we'll put a children's clothing store in this neighborhood. So census data is used. I mean, it tells us about the American people and what they're like, and that is information that can be used in millions of different ways.
Right. Good to know. And it's great to emphasize that to the community. I'm glad that you shared that the Bronx did well in the census count, and we participated very broadly in the community in the city within a city. Apparently, number
Yes.
7 in the biggest U.S. cities. Before we go, Mark, can you just share how people can find more information and data about the 2020 census results at this time?
I'd be happy to. Our website is census.gov. And from there, you can do all kinds of searches on the different data sets and the 2020 census results. We have a bunch of small blogs as part of our America Counts series that get into a little bit more detail on each of the topics in the 2020 census.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Mark.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Marc Perry is a senior demographer at the Census Bureau. We'll be right back here on Open BXRX Tuesday.